We've been working through the book of 1 Peter in this series called Upstream. And, just to kind of remind you, right, we've got a group of people in 1 Peter who are going through a very difficult time. They've been persecuted for their faith. They're struggling to live out this life of following Christ. And Peter is saying to them, hey, I know you're struggling. I know this is a terrible time, but man, keep on keeping on, right? That's what we've been talking about. And so we're going to pick up. I've been stuck in chapter 1 for like the first 3 weeks, right? And so there's other chapters. We're going to fast forward a little bit. We're going to look at chapter 3. And really, this is a different kind of sermon today. As I preach through chapter 3, there's a lot in it. And so I'm going to mention a lot of different things. In fact, what I'm going to talk about, in chapter 3, what you have is Peter looking at this group of people, and he's saying, hey, again, I know this is hard, and I know this is difficult, but like, keep to the way, right? Keep following Jesus. Keep your faith, like, first and foremost. Remember, we talked about earlier, your citizenship is not here. You're living for a world to come. And then what he's saying is your relationships, they matter. I mean, your relationships are really important. And the way that you live out those relationships and the way that you do the one another's, the way that you love one another and the way that you kind of operate together will speak a lot about who you are. And it's one of the ways in which you will show this world who you really follow. And so now, as I read this, some of you are going to be like, man, that sounds like old stuff, right? And just so you know, like, I want you to hang with me, okay? Because there's a lot of good things. And here's what's always the case about Scripture. We always have to remember, right, that when Peter was writing, there was a context in which he was writing. There were certain ways in which women were viewed, men were viewed, relationships were viewed. But know this, that even a couple thousand years later, right, this stuff is still relevant to us. In fact, I hope, and I want you to look at it this way. When I talk to you this morning, I'm going to mention a lot of different things. And so it's kind of like throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall. And you're the wall, okay? And so I'm going to throw a lot of things, and I want you just to pay attention to what sticks for you. And what I've prayed and what I trust, just as I do every single week, you're here for a reason this morning, for a purpose. And God wants to share something with you. And so whatever sticks to your wall, pay attention to. And then I want you to ask him to help you in that specific area. Are we good? All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning. I thank you for the worship time we've had. I thank you for the opportunity to be in this room today. I'm thankful for every person who sits in here and who's said, I'm going to make time in my busy schedule this weekend to give an hour right here to hear from you. And Lord, I pray that'd be exactly what would take place, that people would not hear from me today, but Lord, you'd take these things and you'd apply something to every person who's in the room, and that we would leave knowing we've heard from you. I ask for your help today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Now I'm going to read the first 7 verses to you, and then I'll read a couple more later. And so we're going to kind of work through it in pieces today. Are you ready? Okay. In the same way, you must accept the authority of your husbands. Then even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They'll be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, or beautiful clothes. You should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is so precious to God. This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husbands. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband Abraham and called him her master. You are her daughters, and when you do what is right without fear of what your husbands might do. Now, husbands, in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. Now, some of you are going, oh boy, right? What are we going to do with that this morning? And so here's where we're going to start. In fact, I saw a quote this week. We're going to start talking about marriage, and then we're going to get into all of our relationships, okay? Because that's what Peter does. He addresses wives, husbands, And then the next section, which I haven't got to yet, says all Christians, okay? So really what he's doing is he's talking about all these different kinds of relationships. And how we live in those relationships is really, really important in regards to how we reflect Christ in the world that we live in. I saw a quote that said this, marriage is like a walk in the park. Jurassic Park, right? I thought that was funny. Not my marriage, of course, but I'm sure everyone else's. You know, I'm not a marriage expert. I've been married for 17 years and counting. And man, it's far from perfect, but I'm just as committed as I've ever been, right? And we're not a leave it to Beaver kind of household. That may have just dated me. Some of you are like, who in the world is leave it to Beaver? Look it up later, right? But I'll tell you this, we work hard at our marriage, and we work hard as a family, and we grow with the Lord's help over the years. How many of you would say that about the relationship? Yeah. It's a process, isn't it? And man, maybe you go, oh, marriage is easy. And you know, you've probably been married a week, right? So give it some time. It's hard. It's hard stuff. And so I'm not going to spend all morning here, but I'm going to talk about some of this. So Peter first speaks to the wives. That's where he starts. And I thought it was interesting that when he speaks to wives and husbands, for wives he gives about 3 paragraphs of stuff. And for the husbands he gives 1 paragraph. You can tell who's writing this stuff, right? One of the things he says, though, in verse 1 is this. In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Now, you're probably going, accept the authority? Now the husbands are going, yes, keep talking, Kevin. I'll get more amens today from the men in the room than I ever have. But for some of you, you might think this is archaic, but hang with me. Others of you are like, oh yeah, Kevin, keep preaching. Like, tell her to bring me dinner and give me a massage and rub my feet, change the channel on demand, right? That's not where I'm going. But I do think this, when it says, in the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Here's the word I want you thinking about. Respect. Respect. Now, respect is a really important word, especially to men. In fact, what I would say is your husbands, they need respect. God knows that. He's built them, right? And I believe that's one of the main needs of most men is to feel respected. That we would find ways to say, I respect you, I trust you. And if you'll find ways, wives, to do that, it will go a very long way in the midst of your relationship. My wife and I, we have something we're kind of working on together, and we've been at it a while, and she just said to me last week, and she had no clue that it meant anything. She was just saying it. But she said, thanks for all you're doing on this, honey. I know and I trust that you're going to figure out the best thing for our family. I felt my chest kind of bump out, you know. And I thought, it was like honey right off her lips. And I listened to those words and I was like, man, that meant a lot. It meant a lot because what she said is, I respect how you're walking through this process. I trust you to make the decision, and I trust you to lead our family. Now, I'll tell you this, like those words, I'll remember them for a while. And you probably could think back to a time where your wife said something and you were like, oh, honey, what? I didn't hear that. Can you say it again? Right? But you also, husbands, you probably remember times when your wife said things that were very disrespectful. The truth is, it's the way we're wired. I tend to remember those a lot longer than I remember the words of respect, right? And oftentimes what we don't realize is our words have so much potential to damage. You may think, oh, he's a man, and it goes in one ear and out the other. But I'll tell you, when your words speak disrespect and the lack of trust and this, and when they do that, it sinks deep on men. Sometimes so deep that those wounds, they're there for years and years and years to come. It's not that God can't heal that, but I do think we have to be careful with the words that we use. It goes on to say, it talks about this, right? This inward beauty versus outward beauty, which I thought was really, really good. See, oftentimes we live in a world where if we're not careful, women get objectified. They do. It's all about what's on the outside. You know, pick up a magazine, right? Watch some commercials, advertisement. What the world says is, women, your beauty is all determined on what's out here. What Peter is saying is, women, when it comes to being a godly woman, where your beauty comes from is not what you do out here. It's what God does in here that works its way out here. In fact, if we would focus more on that, it'd be amazing maybe what it might do in our relationship. See, when God can soften your heart, it's so easy to get hard hearts, right? But wives, if our hearts were soft, if we were able to forgive, if we were able to love, if we were able to trust, if your relationship with God is number one, it will greatly not only impact your marriage, but every other relationship that you're in. It's the truth. All right, now I'm going to move on. Husbands, you're not off the hook. Now every guy's got to go to the bathroom, right? Uh-huh. Oh, honey, I left the lights on. I'm going out of the parking lot. It says in verse 7, in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. Now, here's the word I want you to think about. I'm trying to keep it really simple. We could talk about so many things in the midst of this, but think about this. Honor. Husbands, honor your wives. I was reading an article that talked about ways to honor your spouse. I thought I could probably use that. And I thought it was really good, but also really bad all at the same time, if you know what I mean, men, right? That it was saying some really good things, but I also saw a lot of things that I needed to work on. One of them was this. It started with a very difficult one. And it said, you want to honor your wife, serve her. Whew. Do I need to say much more? All right. Serve her. Sometimes we got it mixed up. See, sometimes we think because we got married that they're supposed to serve us. The reality is you want your relationship to prosper and to be good. Find ways to serve her. I had a friend, and he grew up just differently. A gentleman that I knew, and I couldn't believe he was telling me this one day, but he said, Kevin, he was dead serious. He said, Kevin, I sit on the couch and I watch some baseball, and I pop up the leg thing, and man, it's awesome. He said, I drink my tea, and when my tea's gone, all I got to do is just jiggle the ice. I was like, what do you mean, jiggle the ice? He's like, I just jiggle the ice. She knows. Like, she knows what? She comes and she refills my tea. And I was thinking, I am not trying that, right? Hey, honey, jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. She would be like, jiggle, 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 what? I couldn't believe, I was like, I don't think that's going to work at my house, right? But what if we found ways to serve her? I had somebody who said this morning, they were here last night for the message, and they walked in and they said, Kevin, I just want to tell you something. My husband got up this morning and he brought me a coffee. Oh. Here's what I'm going to tell you, men. If it's that easy, sign me up, right? Here's the deal. We think it's like these big, grand, huge things. It's the little small acts of service that mean the world. That express that, hey, I'm honoring you. I value you. We're in this together. And then the second thing he talked about was listening. Oh boy, right? In fact, there's a quote I saw this week. It said this: being married is like having a best friend that doesn't remember anything you say. Right? Listen, and the other word that was used in that was engage. I tell you, I think I listen. I'm watching the game. Anything she says, yeah, huh? Yeah. And a day later, I miss some big cue, right? I'm like, honey, you never told me that. Oh, yes, I did. Was it during the game? Right, because that doesn't count, right? Listening, engaging is actually like looking them in the eye. And not just doing this, but actually listening, engaging, saying, at this point, you're more important than anything else around. And I'm zeroed in. Oh, we'd be surprised, right? And I'll tell you this, see, it's hard because as men, we don't listen like we're supposed to, right? Why do you think when they're in a terrible spot, they call their girlfriends and not you? Because we've trained them. We've trained them that we're terrible at it. In fact, oftentimes I'm terrible at it. I know that. The times she talks to me and I'm like, man, I hear you. But it's really not that bad. All you got to do is A, B, and C. You can fix that thing. I'll fix it for you. That never goes well, right? What she's really saying is, I don't want you to fix anything, which I think is silly. Just let me fix it. But what she's saying is, I just want you to listen. Like, I just want you to nod your head and look me in the eye and act like you understand, right? Fake it. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But sometimes we are wired so differently. I think that's what we have to do. We have to look them in the eye and let them know that you've heard it, that you feel for them, but it's okay. Like, you're just going to support them. In fact, that's what the third thing was in this article. It said, stand with them. I thought that was really important. Here's the deal. When it comes to marriage, marriage is hard enough. If you put man and woman together in paradise, it would be hard, right? But then we live on the world in this world that we live. And we come across all kinds of difficult things. Many of you have been married for maybe a couple years or 17 or 45 or 50, whatever it is, many. And you encounter all kinds of difficult things. Here's what's important is that you do it together. That you're truly partners. That you stand together. I can tell you what my wife wants to know from me in the midst of these difficult times is that I'm just going to be steady. That I'm going to be steady and strong, and I'm going to try to I'm going to be there. Right? We can do that. And it means the world. It says, I honor you. And the final thing is love. Obvious, right? Obvious yet so difficult, but that we would love. And I'm not talking about a love that's like a self-serving kind of love. Like, man, I'm going to love her, right? So she'll cook me dinner tonight. I'm talking about a love that is a pouring out kind of love, like Jesus loved. A self-sacrificing kind of love. And when I think about that kind of love, because here's the deal. For most of us, men, we struggle with sometimes getting the cues right. There's some of us who are like, she's going, man, you just don't love me. And you're like, oh, I do. I bring home the paycheck every week, right? And she's going, that's not how I receive it. And you're like, well, then you need to receive it differently. That's a bad attitude, right? That's the wrong way to look at it. Love is how the person receives it. So you got to pay attention. It doesn't have to be these huge, grand things. But when you do something and you see her kind of go, oh. A while ago when I said something about bringing a coffee, oh, right? It's such a minor act. But listen, because when you notice that something connects, that's probably what you should be doing more, right? And I realize, listen, I get it wrong all the time. But sometimes it's just putting a little more effort. And it's saying, God, help me to see. We sang about it. Give me the eyes to see what I need to see. Help me to become a better husband and a better wife. Because here's what I'm going to tell you. It goes on to say in verse 7, she may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should so your prayers will not be hindered. This is not about, hey, women are this and men are masters and, that's not it. This is about being equal partners. And the truth is, when men feel respected and women feel honored, relationships flourish. When both of those are happening, what Peter is saying, when both of these kinds of things happen, you will be a shining light in the world for all to see that Christ has made a difference in your relationship. Powerful stuff. But I'll tell you often where we get stuck, and then I'm going to move on. Where we get stuck is this. That sometimes we're like, he just doesn't honor me. He just doesn't love me, right? That's what we do. And then he's like, well, you don't respect me. So I think we're even, right? And what you get is this great divide. And she's saying, well, if you're not going to respect me, I'm not going to honor, I'm not going to love you. If you're not, he's saying, if you're not going to respect me, and she's saying, man, you're not going to honor me. There comes a point where people get tired, right? Tired of trying to respect and then no honor in return, and trying to honor and no respect in return. But I'll tell you, it takes both people 110% with the Lord's help to do this kind of thing. But I'll also say this, and I did not say it last night, but I'm going to say it this morning. I heard it this week, and I thought it was a great reminder, and I've said it before. Listen, I'm guessing there's people in this room today that your marriage is all but dead. It's all but dead. And this is the most uncomfortable sermon you've been ever at Crossbridge, right? I'm sorry. But here's what I'll tell you. Like, you come to this room, and the centerpiece of what happens is this room is a God who sent his son to die and was resurrected. And if we believe in this God who sent his son to die and was resurrected, our God specializes in taking dead things and breathing life into them. So be encouraged today. Get help today. Do what you need to, because I'm telling you this. On your own, you're right. Dead as could be. But with God's help, there's potential for life. All right. Now, rest of the relationships, right? Let's take a look at some of these things. 1 Peter 3:8 says, finally, he's talking in this subsection, says all Christians, all of you should be of one mind, sympathize with each other, love each other as brothers and sisters, be tender-hearted, keep a humble attitude. When it says be of one mind, pay attention to that, right? Think about your relationships. I'm not talking about just marriage. I'm talking about friendships and work relationships and cousins and aunts and uncles, whoever, right? The people that are in your life. Another way to say this upon doing some study is this: live in harmony with one another. Harmony. Now, when I was in Salem, every once in a while, the sound person, so here's what they would tell me. Hey, go ahead and just turn your thing on so you don't forget. So I'd turn it on, and I'd sit on the front row. And during worship time, man, I'd sing for all I'm worth. I love to sing, right? And he'd always say, I got you muted. But about once every 3 or 4 months, he would forget. And so what would happen is I'd be on the front row. Yeah, I'm singing. I'm letting it go, right? And all of a sudden, I make eye contact with the worship leader, and he'll be doing this. Mm-mm. 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 He's trying not to be obvious. Everyone in the room knows, right? And really what he's saying is, you are being heard. Turn your mic off, right? So embarrassing. And here's the deal, because when I would sing, when people sing, when it's done right, all these voices blend, right? And they all kind of, they fill in a gap here, and they fill in a gap here, and they fill in a gap here, and it sounds beautiful. But when my voice came in, it didn't fill in any gap. It filled in this awful gap. And everyone could hear it because it was not in harmony. Now, if you have a relationship that is out of harmony, you know it. You know it about as much as if I were to sing in this room and it were to stick out like a sore thumb. I know that God can bring that relationship to mind just like that. And you'd say that relationship, whether it's with someone in here, one of your cross-bridgers, maybe it's with a neighbor, maybe it's with someone at work, but it's not in harmony. And then I'd ask you, what have you done to bring that relationship back into harmony? With God's help. Goes on to say, sympathize with one another. Another way of saying this is be compassionate with one another. I think that's really important. In fact, I think it's one of the things that we have to do as Crossbridge. We got to find ways to celebrate with one another and suffer with one another. To recognize on any given Sunday and any given Saturday night, you might be sitting next to someone who's just sitting right on the edge of life right now. That at times your neighbor has had a terrible week. That our eyes would be open to being compassionate for one another. 1 Corinthians puts it like this: if one part suffers, all parts suffer with it, and if one part is honored, all parts are glad. Matthew 9 says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Do we see the people around us and have compassion on them? And then it says, love each other as brothers and sisters. We're not talking about this marriage kind of love. We're talking about a brotherly, sisterly kind of love. A family kind of love. I think of my own kids, right? And I have a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, and for a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, they really love each other. I mean, like, they're tight, right? But even this last week, my wife came home and found my son and daughter on the hardwood floor in the kitchen. Tamara had him in a chokehold. And I'm telling you, she's tough as nails. She had him in a chokehold, and he's trying to tap out, right? Can't breathe. And the dog's barking and going crazy, and I mean, it's a mess, right? Now, that's her way of saying, I love you, right? I've experienced the chokehold too. But there's times, right? You could probably think of, you have brothers and sisters. You know, at times, love can look different, right? But it says, I support you, I love you, I care about you, you're better than this. Sometimes brotherly, sisterly kind of love, it's the love that challenges us. It speaks the truth to us. It's the kind of love that sometimes can have a disagreement, but at the end of the day, we have each other's back. It's that kind of love that we would find those kind of relationships at Crossbridge. I'm telling you, I want every one of you to have those kind of relationships here, real ones, where you can be yourself. They're not, and I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to be honest, and I know I preach it a lot, they're not found in this room. It's too big to find those kinds of relationships. You'll find acquaintances, and you'll find smiley people, and you'll find pats on the back and handshakes. Those kinds of relationships are found when you're intentional about getting in a smaller group of people. We call those groups around here. And you're willing to invest and say, I want deep relationships, which will shape me and form me into people who are more Christ-like. And the final thing I'm just going to go to is it's 3:9. It says, don't repay evil for evil. This is really challenging. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. This is what God has called you to do, and he will grant you his blessing. Now, if we were just to take that for face value, we're like, oh, that's tough, right? Now, think about these people. Think about Peter's writing to a group of people who are losing their life for their faith. People are persecuting them in terrible kinds of ways, and he's saying to them, hey, don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Pay them back with a blessing. That is what God's called you to do, and he will grant you with his blessing. During a time where Christians were brutally beaten and treated terribly, how could they do this? But see, Peter knew something. What he was trying to say is you are a group of people who are different. We talked about this a week ago. You are set apart for God's use. You're not living for your citizenship here, but you're living for a citizenship that is to come. This whole world is going one direction, and God has called you to go against the grain, to go upstream, which means your relationships are going to look different. But with his help guiding you in those very relationships to practice the kinds of things that look like him will speak to the world that your relationship with Christ is real and transformative. That it's everything to you. And it's changing who you are. Can you imagine if we were to practice some of these things, as Kara Ann mentioned, across the Illinois Valley? See, people don't want to just hear what you have to say. They want to see that it's actually transformative in your life. If it's transformative in your life, they'll be begging you. They'll be begging you to say, where did you find that? Because I want the same thing. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you. I thank you for these good words in the book of 1 Peter. Man, they're so challenging. God, relationships, they are hard. I mean, all of our relationships are hard. They require work. They require investment. There's blessing that comes with it. But God, we recognize, we come to you today and we ask for help. We lean on you. We lean on you to help us to practice these kinds of things. We don't produce this kind of stuff on our own. We don't just get up and leave this place and say, okay, I'm going to try, I'm going to be more compassionate. God, it's directly related to our relationship with you. These things are spillover from our relationship with you. God, I pray that you give us eyes to see the truth in our relationship. I pray that you would whisper in our ears and tell us and show us the things that we need to see on the fly. Adjustments to make, ways to respond. If it's just even getting up and delivering a cup of coffee. God, I pray that this would not be overwhelming, but there would be a sense of, God, you can help us. As we talked about last week, looking more Christ-like, that, God, you can help us in regards to every relationship we find ourselves in. I give you thanks today in Jesus' name.